Imagine walking away from the greatest heartbreak of your life. The dust of the road rises with every heavy step, sticking to your sandals as you try to escape a city that just crushed your entire world. On that same Sunday, as the sun began to set over Jerusalem, two disciples were walking towards a village called Emmaus, about 11 kilometers from the city. They are not just walking, they are fleeing. They are walking with the heavy, dragging steps of men carrying a burden that their legs have not yet accepted. The city behind them is moving on. The massive and complex machine of urban life continues turning, as if nothing had changed. But for these two men, everything has stopped. It was not just the death of a master. It was the absolute collapse of an entire world of meaning. They had seen the blind receive sight, the lepers cleansed, and the dead called back to life. They had secretly fed the hope that the kingdom of God was arriving, that Israel would be restored, and that something completely new and impossible was about to happen in the world. Now, that hope had been nailed to a Roman cross on Friday. As they walk, their faces are loaded with sorrow. They talk obsessively about the trauma, the trial, the crucifixion, and the destroyed hope. They also discuss the confusing rumors of that very morning, about women who had gone to the tomb and returned with a story of angels and a missing body. It made no sense. A mind disturbed by grief does not think in terms of impossibilities. They are trapped in a loop of despair, not knowing what to do with any of this. And then, in the middle of this suffocating silence, a third traveler joins them on the path. How do you explain the collapse of your entire belief system to a stranger who seems to have just arrived from another planet? The two men stop for a second, their eyes red from the dust, and the crying they tried to hide. Cleopas, one of the two, looks at the traveler with a mixture of disbelief and irritation. In his mind, there is only one topic being discussed in every courtyard and every tavern in Judea. Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days? He asks, his voice cracking with the fatigue of a soul that hasn't slept since Thursday. They begin to pour out their hearts. They speak of Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. Notice the choice of words, was. The past tense is the sharpest blade in the language of grief. They explain how the chief priests and rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death and crucified him. Here, the historical reality of 33 AD bites hard. They weren't just mourning a friend. They were mourning a revolution that had been decapitated by the Roman Jewish political machine. The smell of the city's incense and the stench of the execution hill are still fresh in their sensory memory. Then comes the most painful part of their confession. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. Imagine the weight of that hoped. It is the sound of a door slamming shut forever. They are not just disappointed, they are existentially lost. They mention the report from the women, the vision of angels, the empty tomb, but they dismiss it as a confusing postscript to a tragedy. Their eyes are kept from recognizing him, a psychological veil woven from the threads of trauma and the impossibility of what they were actually seeing. They were looking at the answer to their prayers, but their grief was so loud they couldn't hear the silence of the miracle walking beside them. Imagine the absolute shock of being firmly rebuked by a stranger when you are at your most vulnerable. Instead of offering empty platitudes or gentle pats on the back, the third traveler looks right through their grief. "How foolish you are," he says, his voice cutting through the heavy air. "And how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken." It is a bold, almost scandalous statement, yet there is something in his tone, an authority that doesn't crush them, but rather awakens them. The dusty road beneath their sandals suddenly feels less exhausting, and the oppressive heat of the Judean afternoon seems to give way to a strange, inexplicable focus. Then, he does something that changes the entire trajectory of their lives. Starting with Moses and moving methodically through all the prophets, he begins to explain what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. He takes the fragmented, bloody pieces of their shattered theology and begins to rebuild them. He does not offer them the political, conquering king they wanted, but reveals the suffering, redeeming Messiah they desperately needed. In the first century Jewish mind, a crucified Messiah was an absolute contradiction. To hang on a tree was a symbol of being cursed by God. But this mysterious traveler takes the ancient texts, the blood of the Passover lamb, the suffering servant of Isaiah, the deep, forgotten promises of redemption through sacrifice, and weaves them into a perfect, undeniable tapestry. He shows them that the Roman cross was not a tragic interruption of God's plan. It was the very climax of the plan itself. As they walk, mile after dusty mile, the shadows grow longer. The rugged, rocky landscape of the Judean hills turns golden, then deep purple. Yet, inside these two men, a profound psychological and spiritual shift is occurring. The physical fatigue of the long trek is replaced by a rising heat in their chests. They don't know who this man is yet, but every word he speaks acts like a spark hitting dry kindling. Have you ever considered that the answers you are desperately looking for might already be walking beside you, disguised in the mundane rhythm of your everyday life? We all have our own road to Emmaus. It is that bleak stretch of time right after a major disappointment, a failed relationship, a lost career, a sudden loss, or a deep prayer that seemed to simply echo back empty. In those moments, we are exactly like Cleopas and his unnamed friend. We walk away from our hopes, dragging our feet through the dust, obsessively recounting the details of our own defeat. We build a narrative of despair so heavy that we become blind to everything else. The psychological realism of this first-century encounter is staggering because it perfectly mirrors how human grief operates today. When you are in the middle of a crisis, your brain creates a tunnel vision focused solely on the trauma. You cannot see the grand design. You cannot recognize the presence walking right next to you. As the three travelers approached the small village of Emmaus, the sun was almost completely gone. The air was turning sharp and cold, the harsh Judean night settling quickly over the rocky hills. The stranger acted as if he were going farther down the road. Here is a profound, subtle detail about how truth operates. It rarely forces itself into your life. It waits to be invited. The disciples, feeling an inexplicable heat in their chests from the conversation, urged him strongly. "Stay with us," they insisted, "for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over." They invited him into the ordinary. A simple stone house, a rough wooden table, the familiar smell of olive oil and warm, unleavened bread. It is in this everyday act of sitting down to a meal, right in the middle of their messy, unresolved trauma, that the stage is set for the ultimate revelation. How often do we miss the profound because we are waiting for the spectacular? We look for parted seas, but true restoration usually happens at a simple table. Imagine the dense silence that settled in that small room, lit only by oil lamps. The mysterious traveler, who had accompanied them throughout the long and dusty road to Emmaus, sits at the head of the table. Not as a guest, but as the host, he takes the rustic bread, lifts his eyes, blesses it, and breaks it. And in that exact second, the psychological and spiritual veil is completely torn. The sound of the bread being broken, the unmistakable way of blessing the meal, the hands that hold it. Suddenly, the illusion of grief dissolves. Their eyes are opened. It is him, The master they saw die is there, breathing, alive, at the same table. And as soon as they recognize him, he simply vanishes from their sight. They do not scream in fear. They look at each other, breathless, and say the phrase that would echo for eternity. Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? That fire in their chests was not just human emotion, it was truth itself rising within them. Immediately, the absolute exhaustion of those 11 kilometers vanishes. The fear of Roman soldiers, the deep darkness of the Judean night, the bandits on the road back to Jerusalem. None of that matters now. They stand up, leave the meal untouched on the wooden table, and run back to the city. Grief was over. The history of the world had just been rewritten for good. This is the raw and immersive beauty of the road to Emmaus. The risen Christ did not first appear in a glistening palace, nor in the temple courtyard, nor to the senators of Rome. He chose to walk in the dust with two heartbroken men, listening to their pain patiently before revealing the magnitude of his plan. He still acts this way today. When our dreams take terrible turns and our hopes are buried, he walks with us on our worst day, waiting only for the exact moment to break the bread and heal our blindness.